His stomach rumbled again. It always did on the fast days of Monday and Thursday. He told himself that he wasn't hungry and that it was probably a sin to even acknowledge the feeling. He sat down and thought about the meeting he would attend later that evening. They'd all be there, the good and the great, but they would have to be careful. This was a dangerous time. One wrong move and there would be riots, and they would lose the chance to remove this cancer from their ranks. What do they say? You fight for what you love, what you believe in. I've spent my whole life fighting for what is right, what is clean, what is just before God, he reasoned. If it hadn't been for us, there would be no Jewish faith, no Jewish race, no religion, just more Gentiles, more unclean people like that scumbag tax collector. His thoughts went back to his recent excursion to Jericho, where he'd been sent by the others to get evidence. Imagine eating with him, the filth-ridden thief, with his greasy little hands, touching unclean money from unclean people and robbing decent people to feed those swine, the Romans, touching unclean girls and selling them to the Romans and anyone else who'd have them. Disgusting excuse for a man. Who in their right mind would eat in his house? Initially, after hearing about sick people being healed, he wondered what this traveling rabbi might be all about. Maybe he was going to do good. But whatever feeling he'd had about the rabbi when first seeing him, he knew now that he was no Messiah. After all, who would make themselves unclean before going to Jerusalem for the greatest feast of the year? Surely he knew who the tax collector was. And even if he wasn't sure, he'd seen him with the fallen woman. What rabbi would talk to them, let alone let them touch him? No Messiah for sure. And what a sad, ragtag bunch of followers surrounded him. The people couldn't get enough of him. A few tricks and bang, they'd follow him anywhere. We are the real saviors of the Jewish people, he thought, at least until the real Messiah comes, who will destroy the Romans and put us back in charge of our own destiny. God is for us because we observe his law. He shook his head at the thought of all he knew about the rabbi, leading the people astray and slandering the leaders of the people. These were serious crimes, and he would pay for them. We would just need to get the timing right. Matthew's Gospel tells us that Jesus predicted he would die at the Passover feast. He writes, then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they plotted to arrest Jesus in some sly way and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. We might ask why they hated Jesus so much, especially when we consider that Pharisees and teachers of the law were people who had dedicated their whole lives to the study of Scripture and the service of God. How come they didn't see him in it like we can? I think that at least part of the answer is that they were coming from a completely different mindset. They believed that the only way to please God was to closely follow the law. They argued endlessly about tiny matters of observance, and Jesus regularly shamed them by telling them their debates were irrelevant. This infuriated them because it questioned their whole lifestyle and the influence that they had with the ordinary people. Jesus spoke with authority, and that also really upset them, as they thought that they were the ones who were the real authority on everything to do with the Torah, the law. I mean, who was he? A poor carpenter from Nazareth. And they were trained scholars who had spent years in synagogue schools. Also, they hated the fact that he was so inclusive. Their religious framework was one of exclusivity. Jews only, and the clean ones at that. But Jesus regularly broke the protocols and included those who should be excluded in their way of thinking. In fact, they probably believed that if Jesus continued to gain more followers, he could ultimately undo much of the work they had spent the last 150 years doing. We also read in John's Gospel that some of the leaders did believe in Jesus, but they were so afraid that the Pharisees would put them out of the synagogues, they kept their mouths shut. John says they loved human glory more than the glory of God. The Pharisees weren't all bad people. They spent their lives trying to follow God correctly. But like them, we who spend our time in the Scriptures and try to live upright lives can be prone to spiritual pride. We too can also end up cold or legalistic and even exclusive, barring people from our club because they don't fit in. At a conference I was at recently enough, I was sad to learn of a church where they stopped doing any evangelism in the area around the church building because the people were too difficult to deal with, too messed up. So they went looking for people in the nicer part of town, where the inhabitants were more like themselves. It might be an extreme example, but it is sad. As we enter into the beginning of Holy Week, let us ask the Spirit of God to give us tender hearts that reach out to everyone. That like Jesus, we would not judge people by either how they look or their lifestyles. Let us also pray for humility, so that we do not fall into spiritual pride and thus fail to see God.